So what I'd like to do is talk to you for just a moment about the work of William Bridges. It is so important when organisations take on change that they understand the distinction between change and transition. Change is what you do to people. Transition is the process that they go through. And this was a key distinction that William Bridges described. And he also described a known and reasonably predictable process that people go through in that transition as they adjust to the changes. Now, the most important thing about this is that the change can be initiated by others, or we can initiate it ourselves. So, for example, if you go to and live in another country, in another city, for whatever reason, that's a change. But it's a change you initiated yourself. Alternatively, you may find yourself in an organisation with a new CEO who wants to sweep the floor clean and makes wholesale changes to personnel and to senior management personnel, possibly well-intentioned in the spirit of bringing in a new culture or a new way of doing things. But what happens to those people, and what happens to the people left behind, William Bridges can inform us a lot about. He can tell us that in such moments of disruption, whether we choose it ourselves or whether it's imposed upon us, we are going to go through a process that will be discomforting in some way. And that model that he explained is what this article is about. And it also explains the processes that you go through. In the initial stages, you can react violently, that is, emotionally violently against the changes, with dismay, bewilderment, denial, or a whole range of other emotions. Then you move into a stage where you feel lost, you feel disoriented, and that disorientation creates with it a whole sense of anxiety because you can't see the future. And eventually, you get to a point where that future becomes a little bit clear. You see some signposts, you see some beacons on the hill that will take you out of this desert, as he calls it, metaphorically, of confusion and anxiety about your future, and you find something that you can attach yourself to, that you can commit yourself to, and that you can move towards. This process may take a very short amount of time for some people. It can take years for some people. The death of a loved one is a perfect example when you go from a married state to a widowed state. The separation of two people who've been in a long-term relationship is another example of a change that also is associated with a transition. When you've had an organisation where people have worked in it for a long time and identified very strongly with that organisation and with each other, and you get a disruption across the top ranks of the organisation by a new CEO, for example, bringing in and remove his or her own people and removing a lot of the carriers of the old culture. Not only those people who are removed, but also the people who work for them and the people who work for them will all be going through a transition, as William Bridges calls it. In some ways, you can think of a change as what happens above the water, above ground, and the transition is something that goes on below the ground, like an underground stream. Everybody goes through transition in their own time, and it can't be forced or made